Assalamu alaikum, this is Dr. Hasna with Hasna's Anatomy, and today we're discussing the anatomy of the larynx, so do not forget to subscribe to my channel and continue watching as I make larynx a very easy concept. Today I will be discussing the cavity of the larynx, and along with that we'll talk about the muscles of the larynx, the origin, insertion and the actions they produce. And finally we're going to talk about the nerve and blood supply of the larynx. So let's get started. In the cavity of the larynx, you can see I'm opening up the larynx right here. We are viewing it laterally. It basically extends from the inlet of the larynx, which is lying right over here, from the laryngopharynx. It is starting to the lower border of the cricoid cartilage. Right here, this is the cricoid cartilage, then the tracheal rings begin. So this is the lower border. So up to here is your larynx. This area is the cavity of the larynx. The inlet boundaries of the larynx are very important, and you can see by yourself that anteriorly is this epiglottis. On each side is this fold called the aryepiglottic fold. So if we look at this fold posteriorly, you can see on either side is the aryepiglottic fold. Posteriorly, the boundary of the inlet of the larynx is formed between the two arytenoids. There is a mucous membrane fold called the interarytenoid fold. Next thing what we see in the laryngeal cavity is this part. You can see these are the folds on either side. The upper fold is called the vestibular folds, whereas the lower folds are called the vocal folds. Between the two vestibular folds lies your rima vestibule, whereas between the two vocal folds lies rima glottidis. These are the two arytenoid cartilages. We all know that the vocal folds extend from the arytenoid cartilages posteriorly and go up to the thyroid cartilage anteriorly. Between the two arytenoid cartilage, there is this fold of the mucous membrane known as the interarytenoid fold of the mucous membrane. So this way the rima glottidis, which is the area between the two vocal folds, is divided into an anterior intermembranous part. The membrane, we all know vocal fold membrane is the conus elasticus. Alright, so here's a membrane and here's a membrane. So between intermembranous part and posterior intercartilaginous part. So you can see these folds are restricted posteriorly. They're limited posteriorly because of this fold of the mucous membrane that exists. So we cannot have this entire opening to ourselves. We have to, there's a narrowed opening because of this fold called the interarytenoid fold. All right. Between the vestibular and vocal folds lies your an area that is sinus or a space. This is known as the sinus or ventricle of the larynx. What is the importance of this sinus? It basically, the anterior part of this sinus is expanded into a diverticulum where there are all the mucus glands producing mucus, so that your vocal folds can always be lubricated so you can talk, right? So this anterior part of the sinus is known as the saccule of the larynx, and this is what we call the oil can of the larynx because all the mucus is being produced here and all the mucus is being dumped over here. The part above the vestibular fold is called the supraglottis. Between the two folds is known as the sinus. Below the vocal folds is known as the infraglottis. Also the area between the two vocal folds, you can even call it, in other words, the glottis. And the glottis is a very important region because if there's any carcinoma here, it is the least dangerous of all carcinomas, and that is because the glottis area serves as the watershed line of the lymphatic drainage, which means over here there's no lymphatics. Above it, all the lymphatics drain above, and below it, all the lymphatics drain below. So this is the watershed line. Therefore, there are no lymphatics here. So if there's any carcinoma in the glottis, there will be minimal lymphatic spread. So now successfully we've reached the part where we talk about the muscles of the larynx. And although there are a lot, which I'm not gonna lie is quite overwhelming, it's actually pretty easy if you learn by concept. If you have a good idea of the larynx, you'll have a great idea of the muscles. The first thing I want you to do is draw the placements of each of the cartilages to each other. So we all know there was this cricoid cartilage, it's arched anteriorly and then the lamina posteriorly. So we've drawn the cricoid cartilage. Above the cricoid cartilage, we all know there was the thyroid cartilage. So let's just write a T in that. On the upper border of the cricoid cartilage, we had the arytenoid cartilages, right? And we have another arytenoid cartilage on the other side. So I've drawn the other side's arytenoid over here. Alright, so we know that there are two arytenoid cartilage on either side and they're lying posteriorly. So this is posterior, this is anterior. Makes sense? The next cartilage we have is projecting from the thyroid. This is the epiglottis. This is the basic structure framework of the larynx. Since we know this, we can easily understand the muscles. Now I want you to label the muscles with connection. Muscles are basically going to be between the various cartilages. So obviously their names are also going to be after that. So if it's running between cricoid and thyroid, it's cricothyroid muscle. If it's between thyro and arytenoid, it's the thyroarytenoid. So let's get started by talking about each muscle. The first question is, what are the adductor and abductors of the vocal cords, the cricoarytenoids. So basically this muscle is lying somewhere between the cricoid cartilage and the arytenoid cartilage. Makes complete sense. Why is the cricoarytenoid causing abduction adduction? Is because it has an effect on the muscular process of the arytenoid cartilage. And what is that effect? Let me explain it to you. So here I've made two arytenoid cartilages. All right, we all know that the arytenoid cartilage had an apex and a base and two processes. One that was anterior, this is the vocal process. One that was lateral, that was the muscular process. The vocal process is responsible for attachment of the vocal fold, and this is the vocal fold, as you can see. The muscular process is responsible for all the attachments of the muscle. All right. So the muscular process is where the muscles will act and cause the movement of your vocal folds, which means now if we want to know what the abduction and the adduction, how they take place, we will understand when we study the arytenoids muscular process movement in relation to the vocal process movement. So remember one thing, these two movements are always going to be opposite to each other. If the muscular process is being pulled medially, you can see here, when it's pulled medially, you can see vocal process is being pushed laterally. This results in the, if we're doing it on both sides, this results in abduction of the vocal cords or the vocal folds. All right. Now, if the muscular process is being pushed laterally, you can see the vocal process is being pushed medially, taking the vocal fold with it, causing the adduction of the vocal cords. Now, on the muscular process, in its anterior aspect is attached your lateral cricoarytenoid, and posterior aspect attaches the posterior cricoarytenoid. Both are connecting cricoid to the arytenoid. The anterior aspect, which is the lateral cricoarytenoid, it is the adductor because it causes the lateral pulling of the muscular process, resulting in vocal folds to go medially and adduct. Whereas the posterior muscle is going to give a posterior push. The posterior push will cause medial pulling of the muscular process, therefore resulting in the abduction of the vocal cords. If there is a muscle running between the two arytenoids like that, this muscle will also cause the lateral pulling and adduction of the vocal cords. Now that you know the mechanism of adduction abduction, let's talk about how the muscles are producing. We have two cricoarytenoid muscles. We have the lateral and we have the posterior. The lateral cricoarytenoid runs from the lateral surface of the cricoid cartilage and it goes to attach on the anterior aspect of the muscular process of the arytenoid cartilage. The posterior cricoarytenoid, it attaches on the lamina, posterior surface of the lamina of the cricoid cartilage, and goes ahead and attaches to the muscular process of the arytenoid cartilage on its posterior aspect. So the basic difference is one is at the anterior aspect, one is at the posterior aspect of the muscular process of the arytenoid cartilage, right? So the one that's lying anteriorly will obviously push your vocal cords towards each other, causing adduction of the vocal cords. Therefore, the LCA is the most important adductor of the vocal cord. Any muscle that is lying posterior aspect of the muscle process, giving a posterior pull, is going to cause the abduction of the vocal cord. And this muscle is the posterior cricoarytenoid muscle. These two are the most important adductors of our vocal cords. If you want to add some extras, let's go ahead and add some extras, but the abductor is full. Abductors say, we're done, we are abducted enough, we don't need more abductors in our life. So what we need to do is add in the adductors. So the adductors that you're going to add is another muscle because it lies between the posterior surfaces of two arytenoid cartilages. This muscle is known as the transverse arytenoid muscle. This causes a pull on the arytenoid cartilages, resulting in the vocal cords to undergo adduction. Another one is the oblique arytenoid. The transverse arytenoid, we know the origin is from posterior surface of one arytenoid to the posterior surface of the other arytenoid. What about the oblique or arytenoid? It runs from the muscular process of one arytenoid to the apex of the opposite arytenoid. So these two are the oblique and transverse, causing adduction of the vocal cord. Up to now, we've learned the origin, insertion, and actions of the following muscles. We know exactly where they're located. Well done. If you come this far and you've understood the concept, the rest of the concept is actually quite simple.